Welcome back, everyone. So we're going to move on to a topic today, the Saracens, the Plunderers. This is a very important topic because um, any sources that we look at use different terms for the people who were involved in the 7th century events. Sometimes the word Arab is used, sometimes Tayaye, and sometimes Saracens. And these are used interchangeably, but they don't exactly have the same meaning. So today we're going to be looking at the meaning of the word Saracens, and we're going to be exploring where did they live? What is their geographical location? Do they live deep down in the Hijaz, as claimed by the standard Islamic narrative, or do they live elsewhere? And already in the title, you can see that there is a different meaning to the word Saracens. Now, you will have heard the typical etymology that's given by many people, which is based on a mistaken understanding of the Greek term, which is that it means the offspring or descendant of Sarah. It sounds compelling, but the problem is these people claim to be descendants not of Sarah, but of Hagar. So some do a sort of mental gymnastics and say, but the term is being sarcastic. That's always kind of bothered me as an explanation. But today we're going to explore a different etymology that's not based on Greek, but is actually based on Arabic. And I think we're on more solid ground with that term. So, exploring this topic today, the first thing I wanted to find out was the earliest use of the word Saracen. And the best I could find, the earliest I could find, is the 2nd century AD. It's a Greco-Roman word. The word Saracen comes from the Greek. Now, I pronounced it Saracen because that is typically how we would pronounce it today. But in the Greek, it's Sarakenos. Okay, the Latin Saracenos wasn't pronounced that way in the early centuries, as some will know. But Sarakenos, the C was pronounced with a K sound in earlier centuries. So that's worth pointing out. So the word Sarakene first appears in Greco-Roman text and used to describe nomadic Arab tribes in the Syrian and Arabian deserts. Okay? Notice where we're talking about their Syrian. And Arabian is quite a broad term, but we're going to come to that in a second. Ptolemy, writing in 150 AD in his work Geography, mentions a people called Sarakenoi living in the northwestern Arabian Peninsula near Sinai and the Roman province of Arabia Petraea. Now, where does he not mention? He doesn't mention Arabia Deserta, which of course is the area where you find the Hijaz. Okay, so he doesn't mention that they were there. Nor does he mention that they were in Arabia Felix, which is southern Arabia, happy Arabia, which we today would call Yemen. Okay, so he doesn't mention those areas. He talks about being up in the northwestern part of the Arabian Peninsula, way up, just below Palestine or Israel, to be fair. Okay. Modern scholars often map Ptolemy's Sarakene or Sarakene onto northwestern Arabia around the Sinai Peninsula, extending toward the region south of the Nabateans in the territory historically called Arabia Petraea and adjacent to Egypt's eastern desert. Note what is not included in this description is Arabia Deserta and Arabia Felix, as I've just mentioned. In Ptolemy, it is a geographical and ethnographic label, not religious. Okay, so it's referring to an ethnic group, subgroup, if you like, and it's basically a geographical description. All right, it's not a religious one. Ptolemy defines Sarakene as a region. So if you look at Book 5, Chapter 17, 1 to 5, Ptolemy defines Sarakene as a region west of the Black Mountains, which in Greek is Melana Hori. Okay, it's a term commonly understood to refer to the Sinai Range, situated on the border of Egypt near the Gulf of Faran, which is the modern Gulf of the Suez. Okay, now I've marked it there in the map on the left for you. So that red line there roughly gives you an indicator to where he defines this region. Okay, so that's where he says is the region of Sarakene. All right. Now, I just want to point out that that's about 6 to maybe 700 miles from Mecca. Okay, now it is second century, all right. So there's 500 years yet to go. So people move, but at that time, that's where you stand. On the right, there's a more detailed map, and you can see the various places there. So if you look at the Sinai, you'll see that there's the wilderness of Paran, which is there in the green there in the center of the Sinai Peninsula. You have Edom marked in there and so forth, and then you have up above you have Israel. Okay. Now you'll notice as well in the map there that east of the Sinai Peninsula is Midian. Okay. Now that's going to be relevant because Ptolemy, while he defines their region as that place marked in red on the left, when it comes to, and this is a bit confusing, when it comes to actually saying where they were located, he actually points to an area which is approximately in that area marked there on the right as Midian. Okay, as you can see, it's way north of Yathrib. Okay, and even more further north than Mecca, so it's not close. I know people like to try fuzzy logic and say, well, it's close enough. It's on the same landmass, but no, it's way north. It's in a very specific location, but still, we're talking about the second century. So, but it's a start. Okay, so that is the region and the people where they are living. So the fact that the region is different to the place where the people of that name are living might indicate that they have moved at some point. Okay, but as we'll see later, that's part of the culture of this people. They are nomads. Okay, so let's move on. In Book 6, Chapter 7, Part 21, he mentions that the Saracenoi, as a people living south of the Tadite, placing them in the northwestern Arabian Peninsula adjacent to the Sinai Desert. Now, this Tadite that he mentions are a little known people mentioned by him in his Geographa, Book 6, Chapter 7, as we just seen, within his description of Arabia Felix, southern and western Arabia. Now, that will obviously cause confusion, but Arabia Felix is not conjoined to this area. It's way down south, okay? But it's as part of his description of Arabia Felix, he mentions this up in the north first. They're part of his catalogue of tribes and cities along the northwestern Arabian coastline between the Red Sea and inland desert regions. Okay, and you can see where the source is for all of this. Now, this quote here is very important. I have given you where I've taken it from. Thus, he, consistently with Pliny, who joins them to the Nabatee, places the Sarakene south of the Skinite, who were situated in the neighborhood of the northern mountains of the Arabian Peninsula. But the region Sarakene he places to the west of the Black Mountains, by which name he is supposed to designate the range of Sinai, as he couples it with the Gulf of Faran and on the confines of Egypt. Now, if you look to the map, you can see clearly Sarakene or Sarakene there marked. So that gives you an idea of where the people are located. All right. And it is just to the east of the Red Sea there. All right. Now, this is, as I just repeat, this is about 600 miles north of Mecca. Okay, it's not close by any stretch of the imagination. Now, so are you confused? Summary. All right. On the left-hand side there, you have the region where these people came from, I suppose. Well, certainly the region is called Sarakene, and it's west of the Black Mountains, which is the mountain range in Sinai. Okay, that's the bit in red. The region. Sarakene is the bit in red. Okay. The right map tells us where the people were. Sarakene, they are south of the Skinite, which are the people, as we'll see, who dwelt in tents. Yeah. So we have the Skinite, right? They are mentioned in Ptolemy's Geographia and by other classical authors as tent-dwelling nomads, from the Greek word skene, meaning tent, and are commonly associated with Arabian or desert peoples. Okay? So, tent dwellers. Okay? Uh, I think that kind of gives us a good mental image of the kind of nomadic lifestyle that they lived at that time. We also have this periplus. They who are called Sarakene inhabit the parts about the neck of Arabia Felix next to Petrea and Arabia Deserta. Now, his definition of Arabia Felix is different to what I think most of us would have. I think it's confusing. Arabia Felix is Yemen, so it's not very clear. But next to Petrea, okay, that's fair enough. They have many names and occupy a large tract of desert land bordering on Arabia, Petrea, and Deserta, on Palestina and Persis, and consequently on the before named Arabia Felix. Now you can see that now we're talking about a larger area because we see that it's bordering on Persis, which is Persia. So it's going, if you can imagine, a line going from the Sinai Peninsula all the way across to Iraq and Mesopotamia, that area. That's what's indicated here. So moving to another source then, we have St. Jerome, who says that the region of the Saracens is Faran, okay, which is again in Sinai. St. Jerome also calls this district the Mons et Desertum Sarakenorum quod vocatur Faran, okay, in agreement with which Eusebius also places Faran near the Sarakene who inhabit the desert. So translation of that term or that phrase in Latin is the mountain and desert of the Saracens, which is called Faran. All right. So that's where St. Jerome places them. So now, following on from that, 3rd to 6th centuries AD, Roman and later Byzantine writers like Ammianus Marcellinus use Saracens to refer to Arab tribes on the imperial frontiers, often as raiders or federati, tribal allies. Okay, and so this is from the 4th century AD. Apologies, I've not changed CE to AD there, but um, the Saracens roam freely in the deserts near the Euphrates. So you can see on the map where the Saracens are, okay, on the deserts uh, near the Euphrates. So that can include Iraq all the way up to into Syria. So that's the area. So now we have a kind of an expanded sense of where they are. So the Sinai, the Midian area, and now also into this area here. Okay. Now, for Latin lovers, here is his description in Latin, beginning with Sarakene, and I'll leave it there for you to read. You can pause it and you can examine it in your own time. I'll give you the translation. Right. Here's what he has to say. The Saracens also, who dwell on the edges of the desert, are not subject to the authority of any king, but wander freely, scattered in various directions under the leadership of their chiefs. They always avoid encampments and fortified places as if they were sepulchres. They roam over wide spaces, accompanied by the herds that furnish them with milk and food. In times of peace, they are treacherous, and in times of war, they are cowardly. Their weapons are simple: a bow and a light javelin. They fight from a distance, darting about with marvelous swiftness on fleet-footed horses, not camels, and before you're aware of them, they are gone, evading pursuit. Their homes are wherever night compels them to halt. When the sky clears again after storms, they go on without fear, never resting in one place. The Saracens know not agriculture nor the use of ploughs, and they do not gather harvests. Instead, they roam like wild animals, always on the move. And so, just to remind you that he is writing in the 4th century. So, this is 300 or so years before the events of the 7th century. Okay? There's no Islam here, but they're doing precisely the sort of things that we associate with the Muslims of later times. On this map here, we have what's known as the Limes line. Okay, this is the Roman frontier line. And this is kind of useful because the Ghassanids were aligned with the Byzantines, so they are west of this line here. And the Lakhmids are to the east of this line, who were aligned with the Persians. And the Tayaye were in the location to the east. So the Saracens at this time would have been east of this line, and you can understand that interchangeably they were referred to as the Tayaye. All right, does that make sense? So this is now moving. I think this is taken from either the 6th or 7th century. This certainly would represent the situation in the early 7th century. All right, so I think that gives us a fair idea of what we're talking about here. Now, again, this is taken from websites that I've already shared the link to. Saracens is not a religious term, but descriptive, the plunderers. As their nomadic and migratory habits were described by the latter, so their predatory propensities, according to the most probable interpretation of the name, was by the former, for the Arabic verb saraka, according to lexicographers, signifies to plunder. The derivation of the name from Sarah has been rejected by nearly all critics as historically erroneous, and the fact that the name was in use many centuries before Muhammad at once, and here I think the writer meant to say negates, at once negates the theory that it was adopted by him or his followers in order to remove the stigma of their servile origin from Hagar, the bondwoman. So the Arabic verb saraka, okay, the root means to steal. The verb saraka means he stole, and a noun form would be, for example, sarik, thief or plunderer. So we can see with just a small step how the Greek term was created from the Arabic term. So they are basically thieves, plunderers. That's what the Saracens term means. Okay. Particularly as it does not appear that their name was ever adopted by the Arabs themselves, who would not have been slow to appropriate an honourable appellation which would identify them with the great patriarch. That their predatory character had become early established is manifest from the desperate expedient resorted to by the Emperor Decius in order to repress their encroachments. He is said to have brought lions and lionesses from Africa and turned them loose on the borders of Arabia and Palestine, as far as the Circensium castrum, that they might breed and propagate against the Saracens. Okay, there's your source. So the idea is that this is a hostile term. They wouldn't use it about themselves. Okay, it's an external term for them, and to use Saracens to mean descendant of Sarah doesn't make any sense, because they didn't use it about themselves. If it meant what people commonly say, which is a descendant of Sarah, well, they'd be quite happy to say that. But their argument would be that they're descendants of Hagar, so it doesn't make sense to even to refer to Sarah in that sense. Now, the writer goes on to say, this strong fortress, called by Procopius Cursesium, the most remote of the Roman garrisons, which was fortified by Diocletian, was situated on the angle formed by the confluence of the Boras and the Euphrates. It is still called Carcisia, so that it is clear that in the time of Procopius, the name of the Sarakene was given to the Arab tribes from Egypt to the Euphrates. Okay, so again, just repeat that. The Sarakene, by that stage, were all the Arab tribes from Egypt all the way to the Euphrates. Consistently with this view, he calls Zenobia's husband Odonates king of the Saracens in those parts, and Belisarius' Arab contingent under their king Aretas he likewise calls Saracens. That Roman general describes them as incapable of building fortifications, but adepts at plunder, which character again justifies the etymology above preferred, while it is clear from these and other passages that the use of the name had become established merely as a general name and precisely equivalent to Arab, and was accordingly adopted and applied indifferently to all the followers of Muhammad by the writers of the Middle Ages. So the meaning of the term got lost, but the early meaning was clearly the idea that they were plunderers, and it became a catch-all term for them, especially in the Middle Ages. Now, it should be pointed out that as time went by and as Islam spread, the term expanded to include Persians and include North Africans, or basically all Muslims were called Saracens. Now, so in summary, the Saracen area in the 6th century on the eve of their conquests in the 7th century was approximately the area contained within this shape that I've done here on the map. I could have probably gone a little bit further north in the Iraq area, but just to keep it nice and neat, it's close enough. We got Sinai covered, and we have the Midian area, and there's a vast area in the middle there, which is basically desert where they wandered. Okay. Again, the term Sarakene is a Greek rendering from the Arabic Saraka, according to lexicographers, and it signifies to plunder. It is not a religious term. Okay. And we now move on to a very key thing, which is the Doctrine of Jacob, which refers to the Saracens, and it's often mistakenly dated to 634, but Dr. Peter von Sievers has dated it from 670 to 698 based on the internal geographical references to the extent of the Roman Empire at that time. So it's a little bit later. It's a few decades later. Let's read it and see what it actually tells us, and maybe reinterpret it in light of what we now know about the Saracens. When the candidatus, i.e. Sergius, commander of the Byzantine army in Palestine, was killed by the Saracens, I was at Caesarea and I set off by boat to Sarakene. People were saying that the candidatus has been killed, and we Jews were overjoyed. And they were saying that the prophet had appeared coming with the Saracens, and that he was proclaiming the advent of the Anointed One, the Christ who was to come. I, having arrived at Sarakene, stopped by a certain old man well versed in scriptures, and I said to him, "What can you tell me about the prophet who has appeared with the Saracens?" He replied, groaning deeply, "He is false, for the prophets do not come armed with a sword. Truly they are works of anarchy being committed today, and I fear that the first Christ to come, whom the Christians worship, was the one sent by God, and we instead are preparing to receive the Antichrist. Indeed, Isaiah said that the Jews would retain a perverted and hardened heart until all the earth should be devastated. But you go, Master Abraham, and find out about the prophet who has appeared." So I, Abraham, inquired and heard from those who had met him that there was no truth to be found in the so-called prophet, only the shedding of men's blood. He says also that he has the keys of paradise, which is incredible. Now, the first thing that should really jump out at you is that it mentions the Saracens who don't come from Mecca. Okay? So that is a contradiction of the standard Islamic narrative straight off. The Muhammad of the standard Islamic narrative comes from Mecca. This story contradicts that. Another thing that's a problem is that the key message is about the coming of the Messiah, not about a prophet. Okay? So it says there, the prophet had appeared coming with the Saracens, and that he was proclaiming the advent of the Anointed One, the Christ who was to come. So he's not talking about himself, he's talking about that essentially he's the warm-up act, and he's saying that Jesus is coming back. Okay? So that's very different to what Islam is teaching today, isn't it? Now, the fact that he comes armed with a sword is nothing new for the Saracens. They've been armed with swords from as far back as the 2nd century. So the mere fact that there's someone armed with a sword is not proof of a Muhammad. Now, also the fact that there's a reference to a prophet is not particularly rare either, because in that century, as in many centuries, there were a lot of people believing that the world was about to end because of the events of that century. And then the other thing I should point out is the reference to the keys of paradise. That is not found in any story in Islamic tradition, the idea of Muhammad mentioning about having the keys of paradise. This is a key message, here given, and yet Islam completely ignores this, has forgotten it. It doesn't appear to be the same person. Or, if we're generous, we could say that Islam has got a distorted or badly remembered version of events in terms of what happened. So we have essentially the wrong person with the wrong message in the wrong place. Okay, so that's the problem. Okay, so there's nothing here to prove the existence of the Muhammad of the Sin. This doesn't call him Muhammad or even Mahmed. It's anonymous. Okay, just someone armed with a sword. It wasn't rare for people to say the Messiah was coming during the 7th century. The Sin says Muhammad was the prophet, but this says he was just the precursor to the Messiah. He wasn't that important. His job was just to announce that Jesus was coming. Okay, the Christ, the Messiah. Crucially, and this is often overlooked, the Saracens are not from Mecca. Why doesn't it just say that he's coming with the Arabs? That would be more accurate. At least it opens the possibility of them being from Mecca. And also, this single key message that he has the keys of paradise is unknown to the Sin and sounds like a Petrine claim. Peter in the Gospels is given the keys of paradise. So it sounds very different to the standard Islamic narrative. There's a lot of problems with it. Were there people going around with swords in the 7th century in this area? Yes, there's no question. Were there people who claimed that the world was about to end or that Jesus was going to come back? Certainly. But does that add up to evidence for the Muhammad of Islam? No. As we've said again and again, the story has got massively distorted. Now, the person that is being referred to, if we can assume the Doctrine of Jacob is historically accurate and there was someone going around saying that Jesus was coming, if he was referring to Jesus as the Mahmed, which I would argue is what we find in the Quran, well, then we have at least got some explanation for the origin of the Quran's message. But the problem is, in terms of the overall account of Muhammad, born in Mecca and all the rest of it, the whole story where he lives in Mecca and receives a revelation and so forth down in Mecca, totally divorced from the world 600 miles away up in the north. That story is clearly false. And this here gives us contrary evidence. So we can at least be open here to the possibility of a real historical person, but crucially, he's not the Muhammad of Islam. He's not the Muhammad of the standard Islamic narrative. And his message could be, in fact, radically different from what Islam tells us today, especially if his key message has been forgotten, the idea that he has the keys of paradise. Okay, so thank you for watching. See you all very soon. Bye-bye.